Did you know that Honkai style Ceridra is based on Napoleon? Ceridra is a complex character. She is Amphorus' first and only emperor, a conqueror who led her legions to overturn the titans of old and establish her own law over the land. She's arrogant, a constant schemer, and someone who is willing to sacrifice every piece on the board to attain her goals. At first glance, the historical figure I think most people would associate her with is Julius Caesar. Just look at her first scene.
I came. I saw. I conquered.
Her death at the hands of her closest ally also parallels Caesar's own assassination by Brutus. And generally, the Latin titles of her empire are clear references to Rome and its greatest dictator. But he's not the only great conqueror she's based on. Napoleon is another legendary ruler who led his nation at a crossroads of history, and I can't help but notice the endless similarities between our chess master and the first emperor of the French. The first comparison between the two is that they both lived through troubled times in their countries. Revolutionary France was chaotic, to put it lightly. To give a quick summary, between 1789 and 1799, France deposed its monarch, imprisoned him, declared a republic, ended up at war with all of Europe, executed the former king, set up a system of terror with public executions against counter-revolutionaries, and then ended up at war with all of Europe again. Famine, political violence, and just general instability were commonplace. In Ceridra's birthplace, the Northern Empire of Hyperborea, a more classic political crisis took place. The previous monarch had died with no heir, plunging the realm into a war of succession, which left the kingdom fractured and most of its inhabitants ruined and impoverished. The social backgrounds of Ceridra and Napoleon come into play into both scenarios. Ceridra and Napoleon weren't born into royalty. In a massive country like France, the Bonapartes were minor nobles from the separatist, fringe island of Corsica that France had acquired a year before Napoleon's birth. Ceridra was an orphan child in the poor northern lands of Amphorus, a far cry from the idyllic city of Alcama or the rolling plains of Aedes Elysiae. Circumstance is what leads both figures into the heart of the storm. Napoleon was only 20 when the revolution began. He had enlisted as a lieutenant in the French army at 16 and was a staunch Corsican separatist in school. Both the island's conquest and the revolution opened up his path as a French military commander. Had his home remained independent, he might have never even ended up in France. And if the revolution never happened, it is unlikely his status would have allowed him to climb the ranks. In the same vein, Ceridra was adopted by chance into the royal palace on account of her auspicious blue hair and golden blood. She only steps foot into Hyperborea's political sphere because of circumstance. The civil war and lack of successor is the only reason the aristocrat even bothered to glance at an orphan like her on the street, and her life would have looked very different were it not for the chaos her nation faced. Both figures seized their opportunities and began ascending the ranks of society. They worked within the frameworks of the revolution in the Hyperborean court to gain influence and power, before eclipsing them entirely. Napoleon left behind the cause for Corsican independence and sided with the surging revolution, and at 23 was promoted to captain. He was put to work against both royalist rebels and the Austrian forces near the Italo-Franco border, successfully defeating both. In 1795, he crucially defeated the last major royalist uprising in Paris, bringing him to the attention of both the people and the Republican government, a hero for the former and an asset for the latter. He went on to decisively expel the Austrians from Italy entirely, earning even more fame and political leverage. His actions in Italy, which included looting towns for much-needed funds, drew criticism from remaining royalists. They were purged at Napoleon's orders, leaving the Republicans in his debt. At his own whim, he then left France to invade Egypt, disrupting 3 centuries of Ottoman rule in the region. Upon his return, he received a hero's welcome and found that the Republican government had become bankrupt and unpopular. It was thus to great acclaim that he made himself dictator and an emperor through plebiscite, both times receiving more than 95% of the total votes. Within 15 years of his enlistment, he had become the world's most powerful man. Ceridra essentially started off as a captive of the Hyperborean court. The aristocrat who adopted her killed the previous princess for Ceridra to take her place, and then made himself her regent with all the royal authority, only caring about the orphan as long as she was useful to his rule. The title of princess was thus conditional. Her life was staked on her performance as a pawn on the usurper's chessboard. Of course, Ceridra's own ambition wouldn't allow this, so she quietly began to play the game too. Little by little, Ceridra built up her legions. In the court, she earned the favor of those who had no status but had all the information, the guards and maids. With this, she gained a network of eyes, with which she promised assistance to rebellious, conspiring nobles, making sure her own men were there to pull the trigger when the time came. Her golden bloodline and charity carried her name among the commoners, ensuring popular support from all classes of society, and so all that was left was waiting for an opportunity. Her loyal chancellor secured it for her, an order from the regent to lead a risky campaign southwards into literal greener pastures. If she lost, he'd be rid of her for good, without having risked anything himself, and if she won, he'd take credit on her behalf. The regent, however, had severely miscalculated. Ceridra led her newly acquired troops through the northern mountains, crushing the southern cities one by one in a string of victories that left her more popular than ever. Each triumph grew her army's numbers, their loyalty to her and the legitimacy of her banner, hoisted up at each new city she conquered. Eventually, only one last step was left, which was for her armies to return to Hyperborea. On her silver-white steed, she entered the city, deposed the regent, and seized the birthright he'd promised her, the blue flame crown, before issuing her first decree in the law's name: execution by fire for the usurper. There is no other ruler in Amphoris's history like Ceridra, the first and last emperor. The military is central for both figures. They are rulers, but they are also commanders. Their empires are built on their connection to their troops. Unlike the usurper regent or many of Europe's old-fashioned monarchs, Ceridra and Napoleon weren't happy to sit still in their palaces, far from the action, but rather accompany their troops on the campaign. After all, they had made their names off of the back of their troops' sacrifices, a bond literally forged in blood. Napoleon was notable for his familiarity with the troops, memorizing the names and the faces of individual soldiers and being able to point them out years later. Likewise, we always see Ceridra surrounded by her companions, delegating orders and bestowing her custom titles to each one without fail. In turn, both of their armies were loyal to them to the end. Napoleon's first exile after his failed invasion of Russia saw him banished to the Mediterranean island of Elba, and the restoration of the old French monarchy. But the emperor decided he would return to France. As he landed in the south of France, the newly restored king hurriedly sent troops to stop him. In a famous anecdote, Napoleon simply tore open his coat and dared the soldiers to shoot him if they wished. Every single one instead rallied to him, and this continued until he reached Paris, leading his army for 100 more days until he was finally defeated for good at the Battle of Waterloo by the combined armies of Europe. His most loyal marshals and commanders were steadfast until the end, even if it meant death after the fact. Ceridra's final campaign is thematically similar. At the height of her power, having conquered the other titans, she finally leads her legions against Phagusa, the ocean titan, to complete the core flame of Law's trial. She leads her troops into a destructive battle that ends with the deaths of Phagusa and Ceridra's entire army, besides herself and Iceland. As it turns out, the trial required 500 Chrysos heir sacrifices, and Ceridra willingly sent her army to their doom to achieve this. In the cycle we witness, Ceridra does actually pass Law's trial to enact new rules. One was to let Herda and Skrulum edit the scepter and delay Iron Tomb's progress, and two was a failsafe to activate Iron Tomb if any foreign power tried to actually tamper with Amphoris's existence. Ceridra does so at the cost of her own life, having told Hyceland's one more heir needed to die to enact these changes. But Ceridra's own death at Hyceland's hand after the battle with Phagusa is a constant across all the other cycles. Her motivation in those timelines might have simply to become Law herself. What's interesting is both outcomes are like Napoleon's own dual legacy. On one hand, he, like Ceridra, was deeply patriotic, and undoubtedly took France to new heights, establishing it for some time as Europe's foremost power and the kingmaker on the continent. Ceridra similarly united Amphoris under her banner, linking it more closely together than it had ever been before. Both of them forever marked their nations, but were also deeply marked by them, literally dying with their names on their minds. Napoleon's last words are France, the army, the head of the army, and his first wife, while Ceridra's promise her nation's glory.
Here, Amphoris's Ceridra.
Her failsafe itself is also a final assurance that Amphorius will remain important. Either it survives or no one else does. The other half of the legacy that they share is their drive for their own glory, and the cycles without the Trailblazer and the geniuses. Ceridra is likely to have sent her forces to their deaths simply to grow even more powerful. Likewise, Napoleon's final 100 days was arguably more a manifestation of the emperor's own desire to rule than his people's prosperity. Over 1 million Frenchmen died during the Napoleonic Wars, with the country at war for nearly 2 decades. The sacrifices made by loyal soldiers are spurred on by their belief that they fought for a cause greater than them, whether it was a revolution or the flame-chased journey, and to have their leader betray their belief tarnishes them forever. Outside of their military careers, both emperors are also remembered by their lawmaking. A defining part of Ceridra's character, what sets her apart from rulers before and after her, is that she overturns the old order to implement a new status quo. Her main philosophy is that the old laws exist not for humanity's benefit but for the Titans, and that she would rectify this inequity through force of arms. By stamping out each Titan, she'd also put an end to their rigid and inflexible attitudes towards Amphorius' fate, and instead restore the right to pen Amphorius' laws to its people. Tearing down the old to plant the seeds for the new is one of Napoleon's biggest legacies too. As his armies swept over Europe time and time again, he exported the French Revolution's ideals to the conquered lands. Above all, this included nationalism, and the idea that a nation should exist as a manifestation of its citizens' will rather than as the extension of a monarch's power. For instance, Napoleon's victories against the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire devalued its legitimacy, causing it to be dissolved and imbuing Germans with a new sense of identity based on common language and culture rather than the crown they served. On the legal front, the Napoleonic Code of Law was implemented into the occupied territories. It is the first modern code to be widespread in Europe, and it has kept influencing other nations' systems of law to this day, especially in most of Latin America and France's former colonies. Lastly, let's talk about presentation. The way Ceridra is presented to us just visually echoes Napoleon. The obvious first thing is that she is short. It's a huge sticking point for her in her interactions with others, and one of the most obvious ways to make fun of her, even if punishable by death. The most famous piece of Napoleon's slander is also his height. Short man syndrome is also known as a Napoleon complex. Now, he wasn't actually short for his time. He was 168 centimeters, actually above average, but in French inches that came out to 5'2", something his British enemies ran with as clearly effective propaganda. This is something that people still take as fact to this day. Ceridra doesn't just share Napoleon's slander, she also has his aura. Her return to Hyperborea to reclaim her crown, crossing back into the northern mountains, is atop a silver-white steed, much like Napoleon's own famous painting on his horse Marengo, from when he crossed the Alps like a second Hannibal. The moment that followed Ceridra's self-coronation is also so similar to Napoleon's that there is no way it's a coincidence. In a historical context, European rulers did not crown themselves. They were bestowed the crown by the church, a symbolic endowment from the spiritual leader to the worldly one. Napoleon infamously crowned himself Emperor of the French. His ceremony still had all the pomp of any monarch before him, with the Pope in attendance officializing, but when the time came to wear the crown, Napoleon did it himself. It marked the end of the old ways of monarchy. The emperor was now crowning himself based on his own deeds and in the name of the French people, rather than being technically submitted to the Catholic Church. Now, take a look at Ceridra's signature light cone, epoch etched in golden blood. The Imperator sits in full regalia, wearing a lavish ceremonial crown we don't really see her wear elsewhere, as in the back, an echo image of her gently places the crown atop her head with a smile. On the chessboard in front of Ceridra, another mirror image of her is there, center stage, as the other pieces on the board lay either toppled or standing at attention, as though saluting her. It is a one-to-one homage to Napoleon. Two rulers who forged their titles not through birthrights or someone else's mandate, but through sheer political and military acumen. They carved through anyone in their way, either sending them to the gallows or turning them to their side to get here, and no monarchs of old or titans will stop them now. Ceridra says time and time again that
I would rather be forgotten than be defined.
And that there is no need for history to remember. Ironically, it's the complete opposite. It is somewhat beyond our control. Amphorius will always remember, even if this is very literal. Here's Castrus's quote about her.
I still remember how the flower belonging to the Imperator was always different from everyone else's in the Nether Realm. Though small and frail, that blue blossom was always able to burst through the soil and bloom into a peerless flower, rivaled by none.
It's almost like in Cerydra's nature to mark the world around her, even from beyond the grave. The same is obviously true for Napoleon. Even though he died in exile far from home on the distant island of St. Helena, his legacy remains. Fun fact, Napoleon has the most books written on him than any other person in history, before or after. There's no forgetting him, just like there's no forgetting Ceridra. That's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did, and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I had a lot of fun doing this deep dive on, in my opinion, one of the more underrated Chrysos heirs we've gotten, and I'm still working on more videos for Amphorius that should release eventually. Alright, take it easy, and until next time.